Angela Brown Burke. I'm working with the Rockford Development Council, which is a community-based organization that pulls together, in Jamaica, that pulls together a number of other community-based organizations. And I'm also, within that framework, part of a community-based organization called Women of the East that primarily focuses on gender issues. What I found was that when we're talking about community development and people's economic security, because a lot of the communities that fall within the area in which I work are lower income communities. And so, you know, you had a sense that maybe economic security is one of the issues that you needed to deal with. But what I found was that you couldn't get to the issue of community development and economic security because people were so focused on crime and violence and how that incapacitated them. You know, so they were more concerned. Everybody sees education as one of those things that will move the family out of poverty. And so if your kids are unable to go to school, if they're not functioning well, they're not focused in school because of the crime and violence, you know, if people can't go about their business because of crime and violence, then often people just want to talk about that. They just want to solve that as an issue. And sometimes you have to get them beyond that to be able to then talk about economic security or community development. Or I guess the challenge is to link that with community development, because they do see the link in terms of crime and violence preventing businesses from being established within the community. It prevents individuals who are operating in the community from being able to deliver the service that they would normally, because persons aren't coming into the community. You know, they're not coming in to do their cars. If it's a mechanic, if it's a seamstress, if it's a shop, people are not coming in. But somehow this issue of crime and violence incapacitates them to the extent where they just want to deal, I just want to deal with this. You know, I just want to get rid of this as the major problem. What happened was really very interesting, because although persons weren't moving on to the issue of economic development and community development, and were stuck in talking about crime and violence, and you got a sense that they felt incapacitated. The discussion that took place allowed them, I believe, to understand each other, because it was a local problem. So it wasn't individuals speaking theoretically. You know, they knew what the problems were. They knew who the players were. They knew who the mothers, the sisters, the daughters, you know, the wives were of the individuals who were at the center of the problem. And what I found was that at the end of it, people got a sense, even though sometimes they would not want to say some things in the meeting, the kind of relationship that developed allowed them to create a kind of means of communication outside that eventually helped us to deal with the problem. You know, so from that sense, it worked. Also, we had several repetition, you know, almost iteration of this problem, because you would believe you have solved it, you have gotten the combatants together, you have gotten the victims involved, you know, so they could talk about what the problems were, and there was a lull. And 2 months, 3 months, 4 months afterwards, you're back right where you started. But you know, what we found over time was that, one, we realized that instead of focusing on the combatants, it was also important to focus on the individuals in the community who felt paralyzed by what was happening. It was also, I think, important to have the kind of discussion, including the police, that helped us to understand that although there was a culture of not informing the police, that sometimes the best way to deal with it was to involve the police. And I think we were also helped by the police themselves, who would be part of that discussion, but would ignore some of the law enforcement activities that they would have needed to do if this discussion took place elsewhere, and gave us that kind of space to discuss these things. And for other persons in the community to say, listen, you know, we've been talking as if this thing is normal. It's not normal. You know, there are other communities where this doesn't happen. There are other communities where people know that they're young, their kids are to be protected, their women are to be protected, their elders are to be protected. And so it got the community talking. People sometimes were surprised that some of the women felt strong enough to say these things, you know, with the kind of confidence and the kind of passion. And over time, what that did was to allow the community itself to speak more openly about these things. And so what you found is that the kind of what was tolerated began to change over time, to the point where people realized that as a community, persons were just not going to tolerate certain activities any longer.